Hi everybody, this is Mr. Nolan, and what I would like to show you today is how to use Excel to create a scatterplot. And this is really very easy. There's also a lot of ways that you can go wrong. So I'm trying to give you this video to sort of preempt some of those issues that you're going to have. Also, if you have this video at your fingertips, you can even do this work at home. So we're looking at, in this unit, we're looking at populations, we're looking at how certain factors are related in populations, and so we want to be able to create a scatterplot to do that, a special kind of graph. Scatterplots correlate one factor on the x-axis with another factor on the y-axis. What's great about these in Excel is that they will give you a correlation coefficient, or r-squared value. So that's the key prize, is calculating that r-squared value so that you can figure out, is this correlated or not? That's what's great about scatterplots in Excel. So in this video, what I plan to show you is how to launch Microsoft Excel, create rows and columns for a table, enter data into that table, create the scatterplot graph and format them, and also to calculate the r-squared value. You might have heard of that before, referred to as a correlation coefficient, if you remember freshman math. Maybe if you were in accelerated math, you might have learned correlation coefficient. It's a line of best fit. That's a way of putting it. What's great about Excel, it will calculate a number for you to give you an index, the r-squared value, so you know how tightly correlated this is. So to find Excel, how do we launch Excel? Excel's symbol is this little green X with a little spreadsheet next to it. If you find it in your desktop, it might look like this. It's this little X with a spreadsheet, or you might have to go down into your startup menu and find Microsoft Office, go into that, and you should find Excel, and it'll open right away. When it does, it's going to open to this. This is a blank canvas. There's lots that we can do with this. You notice that it's a big white field of squares. There's a lot of stuff going on up here. We're really not going to look at all this formatting stuff, but we are going to learn how to enter data and to create our table. So if I wanted to create my table, I'm going to pick any square that I want. I mean, typically you're going to start somewhere, in the upper left. And what I have to do first, before I start entering my data in that I'm finding on my populations, I need to create my row titles. And I'm also going to want to make sure that I have units and name those row titles so that it's clear what I'm trying to do. So, I noticed what I've done. I clicked on a row, or I clicked on a box, and that box highlighted. I can also move around the spreadsheet using the arrow buttons in order to move around. I prefer typically to click with the cursor. It's very easy to enter stuff into these boxes. Now that I've got that box highlighted, I can go ahead and type in the name of one of my rows. So for instance, GDP per capita, and I'm going to make sure that a unit is involved. So most of you are finding per capitas in US dollars, and so I'm going to go ahead and include that. Once I'm done with that, I can click the down arrow, and now I'm in a different row, and I can name those rows. The same works going across. I can create the names of my nations, and I can go ahead and name those. One thing I want to point out before I go any further, notice how the title, the words from this box have bled over into box B. I started in A3, but it's actually moved over into B3. So to fix that, what I'm going to do is, with this box highlighted, I'm going to go up to here, and notice how when I hold the cursor between A and B, this little double-sided arrow shows up. I'm going to double-click that, and what that's going to do is it's going to auto-fit my column so that it fits all those words into that column. Always do that. If something bleeds over into another column, always auto-fit, because if you think that you need to move over to another row, you'll screw up your table. So make sure that you auto-fit. So I can go down and I can just type in my stats down here, but you also want to put the names of your nations across the top in this particular activity. So in this case, I'm just going to say nation 1, nation 2, but you would actually name them. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create that column and those rows just so that we have kind of a table to start to work with, and we will go from there. All right. So what I have done is I've typed in all of my row titles, and I've also typed in all my nations. Again, I didn't put names; I just put numbers there. You're going to want to put names, so now I have my table and it's ready to go. Be aware, again, I just have to note I have auto-fitted that column on the left to make sure that none of my words bleed over into the next column. So now this is where I begin data entry. A few things I want to point out about data entry. as you're typing data into a table, never ever include units. Sometimes dollars and percents Excel will work with that, but what I wouldn't want to do is what I'm going to do here. Don't do this. Don't type in something like, $30,000. Right? Excel doesn't know what to do with that word, dollars. It can deal with numbers, but not words. So you're just going to type in just the number, and then you're going to move on. And then you're going to type in, another number, and move on. So you're going to fill in your whole table. I'm going to fill in just 3 rows just so you can kind of see how to deal with graphing, but you would fill in the whole table. And then what you would start to do is to do some graphing from there. So now that I have my nations and I have my column over on the left that shows what all the rows are, now you can do your data entry, and I'll show you how to make graphs after that. Okay, so what I have done is I've just partially filled in this table just to kind of give you an idea of how this works, how I can do some graphing. So over here for GDP per capita, my US dollars, and remember I put units over in here. Notice there's no units inside the table. That will screw it all up. So I went ahead and I typed in all my GDPs for these nations. I typed in 2 other things that I was interested in, life expectancy and poverty rate percentage. Now, I made these numbers up. You have to understand, I made them up. I don't know if these are really the real numbers. That's just something I put in here. I'm just using this for the purpose of showing you how this works. So you can only graph 2 variables at a time. So let's say that I wanted to correlate the GDP per capita in US dollars with the life expectancy in years. So in order to do that, there's a really easy way to do this. I can only highlight those 2 rows. So if you take your cursor and you just drag from GDP per capita all the way down to life expectancy, Excel is going to attempt badly to also graph all that data in between. It will never handle that. So with our scatter plot, we only want to correlate 2 variables. So to do that, I'll show you how to do this. I'm going to use my cursor. I'm going to highlight GDP per capita all the way across so that all my nation's data are included. Notice I did not include the nation names. Those do not matter. We're just trying to look for correlations. It doesn't matter what nation is graphed. We're just looking for how these numbers are correlated. So I've highlighted that one row that I'm interested in. Typically, the first one that you highlight will be on your x-axis. So whatever your manipulated variable is, if you say, I want to figure out how x affects y, I just highlighted x. Usually that's the first one that you highlight. So now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to highlight y. To do that, I'm going to hold Control. Now that I've got my x highlighted, I'm going to hold Control and I'm going to click on life expectancy and drag it all the way across, let go of my mouse, and then let go of Control. Right? Let go of mouse first and then let go of Control. I've highlighted those 2 rows, only those 2 rows. Even though there's data in between, it's not highlighted. Okay? I could have highlighted GDP and then held Control and then highlighted poverty rate, right? And see what that did? It only highlighted the 2 that I wanted. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and highlight GDP and life expectancy. And now I'm going to create a graph. So now that we've entered our data to our table, I'm going to create a graph. To do that, go up here to Insert. It's a little tab up here. I'm going to click it. And I'm going to go over to Charts, and I want a scatter plot. So I'm going to find this little chart here. I'm just going to go ahead and click on the first one. And when I do that, there's my scatter plot. Wonderful. But it's really not done. You can see there's probably a correlation. It looks like our GDP is on the bottom. That's good. That's how I wanted it. And then we've got our life expectancy on the side. But I can't tell because there's no axis titles. So in order to fix that, I'm going to go find this little green plus sign. I'm going to click that. And I'm going to click Axis Titles. So it has actually made room for me to add those axis titles. So down on the bottom, I'm going to put GDP per capita in US dollars. All right. And then over here, you notice I'm just clicking it and highlighting it. On this one, I'm going to put life expectancy in years. Right? Now that I've done that, I want to fix the title. That's not a very good title. So I'm going to say effect of GDP per capita on life expectancy in years. Okay, that's a good title. I might get rid of in years just so that it fits there. Okay, so that's a good title because it gives me an idea of really what am I trying to find out here. Now there's a couple things I can do to continue formatting this graph. One thing is that if you print this, it won't print very well because Excel does this silly thing where graphs are in this gray color. So in order to fix this, I'm going to click on the white space in the graph. It's called chart area. You can see it pops up there. I'm going to click on that white space, go back to home, and here where I see my little color under the A, I'm going to pick black. Now you might not notice that on your screen, but it actually made the text much darker. You could even bold it if you wanted. I can click bold, and look, it's even easier to see. If you want to, you can move this to its own sheet, and I'll show you how to do that. You just right-click on the chart area, go to Move Chart, and then New Sheet, OK. What that has just done is it's moved it to its own sheet. This will print on a whole piece of paper if you wanted it to print on a whole piece of paper. If you don't want that to happen, then what you can do is you can just leave it in the graph area. For right now, I'm going to leave this over in its own sheet, but I'll show you later how I can move this back to sheet 1. So if we look at this chart that we just created, this is wonderful. I still need to add the r² value. So to do that, what you're going to do is it's a trend line. You're going to right-click on one of those points that we have there. You're going to see Add Trend Line. You're going to click it. And what you're going to find over here when you click on that, when you add trend line, you find this box opens up on the right. If you go all the way to the very last option here, it will say Display R² value on chart. If you click that, you will be able to see your R² value. By the way, I'm going to increase font on this chart. It's really easy to do that. Just click on the chart area, click this up arrow by the A, and it makes it a lot easier to see. So I've added my R² value. I've made this very easy to see, and we can see that my R² value is really quite close to the number 1. And what that means, because it's so close to 1, is that it's a very tight correlation, that the GDP per capita, basically the average income, does affect life expectancy. Now, do we know that for sure? I don't, because I made up this data. But once you collect your data from CIA Factbook and you put it into Excel, you should hopefully be able to see some kind of correlation between your X and your Y. Now, I want to show you how to compare R² values. So what I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to do it with the other piece of data that I came up with, namely poverty rate. Okay, so I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to create another chart, but I'm going to create that for poverty rate instead of life expectancy. So I won't go through all the motions, but what I'm going to just remind you, if I wanted to highlight GDP per capita and I want my poverty rate on the Y, that means that now I'm pressing Control and I am highlighting poverty rate and letting go of my cursor and then letting go of Control, and now those are highlighted and it's ready for me to create this graph. So I'm going to create another graph, and then we can compare those graphs and see what we find. Okay, so I have created my second chart, the effect of GDP per capita on poverty rate percentage, and notice it looks really very different from my first chart. So let's jump over here and take a look at that. So this is the effect of GDP per capita on life expectancy. We see it's pretty much a straight line, that the higher your GDP, the higher your life expectancy. We come over to chart 3, it's really a very different story. But I'm still going to add my R² value. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click on that dot. I'm going to say Add Trend Line. Right? It goes ahead and adds that trend line, and we're going to add our R² value. You can always move your R² value. And remember, take this with a grain of salt. I made up these data. These aren't really real data. I made them up. But according to the data that I punched in and I entered, if we compare our charts, this one's got an R² value of 0.8872, and this one has an R² value of 0.643. So at least as long as we're talking about a linear relationship, what that means is that the GDP affects what more strongly? Life expectancy or the poverty rate. And according to this made-up data that I threw in, what that indicates is that GDP affects life expectancy stronger than it affects poverty rate. Now there's ways that you can use Excel to graph special functions. This could be a decaying curve or something like that. But you know, I'm just trying to show you how to find these R² values and compare them. Once you have all your R² values, now you can say this is the strength of that correlation. So I hope that at this point you know how to launch Excel, you know how to create a table and enter data into it, create scatterplot graphs, and then to calculate the R-squared value or the correlation coefficient. This is going to be very, very valuable information all throughout the course, but especially in this populations lab that we're doing. So if you ever need a refresher on this sort of thing, feel free to watch this video. That way you know how to use Excel to get things done.